Gary Numan's first album was released in 1978 under the title of Tubeway Army. This album sold okay, but the second album, Replicas, which was released in 1979, was the one that started Numan's career. Interestingly, after Replicas, they re-released the Tubeway Army album, the first one that was released in 1978, although this has a different cover. And it features Jess Lydiard, Paul Gardner, Jess Lydiard on drums, who was Gary Numan's uncle, and Paul Gardner on bass. And it was the same lineup for Replicas. As a note, if you have the original copy of this, it fetches a pretty penny on the record collecting market. Replicas is a special album for me. When I was 9 years old, I remember walking through the Rue Centre in Bridgend in South Wales with my mum and doing the Saturday shopping routine. And we walked past W.H. Smith and I saw the album in the window there, and it was just striking, you know, mesmerizing. I was just fascinated by the imagery. It was a good indication of the type of mystery that Numan was trying to convey. It's a very simple album cover, but very powerful. And then later on, I saw them perform Our Friends Electric on Top of the Pops, and I was in, you know, I thought, this is great. And I just had to plea and beg for my mum to buy me the Our Friends Electric 7-inch single for my birthday or something like that. She must have thought I was mad in getting into it. Because of course, I come from a background where my mum and dad listened to, you know, Stevie Wonder, funk music, things like that. That's the music I was brought up on. And then, you know, I must have disappointed them somewhat when I turned my interest into, you know, Gary Numan and Tubeway Army. They're like, what happened there? Anyway, they were great. They supported my interest in it. The general concept of Replicas is a dystopian future, a kind of totalitarianism. Some of these themes and narratives were covered in the first album, but in Replicas, it's more developed and organized. There are still some of the rock elements that you hear in the first album, but there's a lot more use of synthesizers. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to run through the whole album and try to explain why I like it so much. I'll also focus on specific parts and sections that I find particularly interesting. The first track on the album is Me, I Disconnect From You. It begins with this melodic figure in the synthesizer. It sounds very cold and distant and very atmospheric. The actual notes that are played are and this figure is repeated. Interestingly, this collection of notes are kind of quite bluesy. I know the blues seems quite irreconcilable with Gary Numan's music, but nevertheless, the notes are so after this repetitive melodic figure, the drums and the bass come in, and it's kind of centered around the G tonality. And then Numan's vocals come in, and it's a lovely melody. Chords go from F, G major, they alternate, and it's pretty much all the way through the song. So if you think of F major, we're all familiar with that sound, the F major scale. But what you have here is an F Lydian, which is the same as a major scale, except the fourth note is raised by a semitone. So instead of this, you get this. So that melody, it's based on the F Lydian, and the Lydian mode is one of my favorite sounds. So I find this song particularly intriguing. The next track on the album is Our Friends Electric. The musical design of Our Friends Electric is really quite simple, but it's the way the synthesizers are combined. You know, the little melodies, the little bass turnarounds, and the little hooks that you hear every now and then. They're really quite powerful. And you have to bear in mind that this was 1979 and nothing like this had been heard before. This was really unique. And not only the music was unique, but the way Gary Numan presented himself. You have the synthesizer playing the main riff. And in the bass, you have I really like Gardner's playing. He's a really effective bass player. Every now and then he does these decorations, these intricate little lines that really add and enhance specific areas in the music. And then, of course, there's the hook that everyone remembers, that tritone interval. After the verse, it goes into this anthemic section. The next section, the chords are G major, D minor, F major, C major. Now, interestingly, as the title of this video suggests, there are no chords on this album. There are no chords at all. Just because Numan was trying to create a specific sound. He was enamored by the sounds of synthesizers and wanted to layer them. And in order to layer them, you can't have too many notes. You've got to have root notes or fifths. And when you start adding notes, as in the case of this, let's say you play an F major 7 and the C major 7, the full chord, the one that's being outlined by Gardner in the bass, it just becomes a mess. So you can't hear, there's no distinction between the synthesizers. It's just too much of a wash. So it makes sense just to use root notes and fifths and things like that. Keep the notes really simple, keep it restrained so that you can really focus in on the sounds of the synthesizers. So the only clues you have, the only indication to the tonality, to the chords of this section are in the bass. So from the bass, we can gather that we've got a G major to D minor, to an F major, to a C major. But with the G major, D minor, F major, the bass is playing a F, C, E natural, which suggests an F major 7 chord. Not a straight F major, but an F major 7. And then when it goes to C, it goes to the major 7 again for C. So you get so really the chords are G major, D minor, F major, C major 7, F major 7 and C major 7. Now, of course, if you use those chords and they're, you know, all the notes, those particular voicings, then the song loses all its drama, you know? It's just no call for the chords whatsoever. But it's interesting to hear where the chords are, how it's being outlined in the bass in particular. This track, to some extent, harks back to the first album that Tubeway Army released, where it was a little bit more rocky. It's essentially a rock trio piece, save for a few synthesizers in the background accompanying it, but it's a kind of standard rock trio, really. Praise of the Alien starts off with this very simple staccato riff. And it's played on the Fender Rhodes, the lower register of the instrument. You can tell it's the Rhodes. The Fender Rhodes has a distinct sound, but it's going through a phaser. The introductory bass line is wonderful. Really nice. Again, Gardner showing his sort of creativity with these little embellishments. Very cool. The sound in the background, these random notes that you hear, this fast series of random notes, sort of a computer-generated sound, if you like, is actually from the SH-2000. Down in the Park was the first single released from the album. It didn't do very well in the charts at all and was completely overshadowed by Our Friends Electric, which was the second single released from the album. Down in the Park is another example of a song that has no chords. You just simply have the root notes. The only indication of the tonality is in Gary Numan's voice, in the melody. So. You can garner the chords from the melody in the vocals. What you have is C major, D major, B flat major, F major, C major, D major, A major. Again, none of the notes from those voicings are sounded, it's just the root note, and you hear Gary Numan's vocals singing the melody, and that's the only indication of the tonality. Following the verse, there's this melodic arpeggio. So the last chord of the verse is A major, then it moves up to B flat major for the I love that melody, it's great, and the chord movement as well, fantastic. B flat major, A flat major. It's almost like you have a B flat sus to B flat major and an A flat sus to A flat major. You Are In My Vision is a catchy little tune. It's fundamentally a rock trio piece. Again, there's a synthesizer in there playing in the lower register, just holding a note. It's got a nice groove to it. The guitar is just simply. You got that moving bass, that continuous sort of ostinato-like bass. It starts off at quite a medium tempo, moderate tempo, and pretty soon speeds up. It speeds up quite significantly. I don't know whether they dropped in or whether they just got really excited I mean, obviously it adds to the dynamic, it adds to the excitement, but it's quite noticeable. At the very beginning, it starts at a certain tempo, and then by the time we get to the middle of the first verse, it's like, whoa, it's really fast. But I mean, you know, ordinarily you wouldn't notice. You just enjoy it for what it is. Replicas is a really dark piece of music. It starts off with a snare drum. Lydiard plays this pattern, and the snare sounds like it's going through a flanger. It has a distinct effect. It sort of has a kind of a marching, almost militaristic quality to it. And you've got these drones in the background as the music progresses. And Numan is sort of singing this melody that's doubled with the synthesizers. Very simple, but very haunting, the atmosphere it creates.
It was hard to avoid. I suppose it was a shame, but they didn't even try.
There's a melody in Replicas that's played by synthesizers and the electric guitar. I think the guitar is distorted, but the combination of the distorted guitar and the synthesizers make it sound like bagpipes. I don't know if this is intentional, but it definitely has that sort of reedy quality about it. Track number 8 is It Must Have Been Years. Now, this is a really heavy track. I mean, it's probably one of the heaviest songs Gary Numan wrote at that time. It's simply drums, bass, and guitar. There's no synthesizer. So it's the only song on the album that doesn't have any synthesizers in it. And it's really full on. But it's also got a really cool guitar riff. I mean, we have to remember that although Numan was into electronic music, he still had a penchant for rock music. And this is one of those classic rock guitar riffs. It's also the track where Gary Numan plays a solo, a kind of really heavy guitar solo. He can play, you know, he can play a good guitar solo. There's some really cool ideas in there. And the sound is great. It's just screeching guitar sound. And obviously they boosted the very high frequency range because it has a lot of air on the top. But yeah, it's interesting, and it's quite novel when you listen to the rest of the album. It's far removed from the more electronic style. When the Machines Rock is a real kind of up-tempo, boppy kind of tune. It's this very carefree, playful type of melody. And the thing I really like about it the most is the bass line. Gardner's bass line is great. It's very solid and persistent. It's great. And it modulates. He plays the same thing in C. cheeky little bass line there. The final track on Replicas is I Nearly Married a Human. This has to be one of my favorite Gary Numan pieces. It's just beautiful. It's so atmospheric and in some ways reminiscent of, you know, the type of music Numan was trying to emulate in some cases on this album. In particular, the Berlin years, Bowie's Berlin years. Yeah, one of those kind of collaborations with Brian Eno on Heroes and Low. That's the beauty of Gary Numan's music, is that if you want to reinterpret it, you know, there's a lot of latitude for adding your own harmony to these really strong melodies. And in this piece, it's just a collection of synthesizers layered on top of each other with this very ethereal kind of melody. A beautiful piece of music, really, really beautiful.